Those of you who have joined us before know this is my very favorite part of the hour is sort of checking out who's tuning in from where. I see everyone from Mississippi to Abu Dhabi already in the chat. So great to have you all with us. We'll go ahead and get started. It's a couple minutes past the top of the hour. My name is Dan Worry. I am so lucky. I wear many different hats, a writer, a teacher, but I am very proud to be a strategic consultant to the Saul Zaentz Foundation, which, for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, exists to honor and extend the legacy of the late Saul Zaentz, who was a music producer, a film producer, um, all around amazing guy. And so we're extending that here through this Meeting the Moment webinar series, where we look at moment, as the title implies, sort of the big topics of the moment. And one of the topics of the moment, in fact, it's amazing to just reflect on how much artificial intelligence has become a part of our lives, certainly in recent years, but at least to me, it feels like even in the past 12 months, it has been just accelerating at such a rate. Frequently, when we talk about AI, we are talking about efficiency around some basic tasks that help us in our lives, or creative capabilities through generative AI. Today, we're going to turn our attention to what I consider to be a much more profound, important application for AI, and that is addressing the complex crisis of homelessness. This is not just about automating our emails or other basic tasks, but really about leveraging data to make a tangible difference in people's lives. And so in our discussion today, we will explore how AI is enabling a kind of a crucial shift from reactive responses to more proactive forms of prevention around homelessness, helping us to identify individuals at risk, maybe before they lose their housing, understanding systemic barriers, and even how AI is helping us to reshape public perceptions of the unhoused. We are fortunate today to have a really distinguished panel of experts who are truly at the vanguard of this intersection between AI and homelessness. They're going to share a little bit about some of the groundbreaking work that they are doing on how AI can be a powerful tool in the fight for housing justice. So we are thrilled today to be joined by Dr. Matthew Hounstein, who is the Assistant Research Professor at the Lucy Family Institute for Data and Society at Notre Dame University. Janie Roundtree is Executive Director of the California Policy Lab at UCLA. Her colleague, Dana Vanderford, is the Associate Director of Homelessness Prevention at the Los Angeles County Department of Homeless Services and Housing. And Abra Lyons Warren is the Director of an organization called Housing Is, that we'll learn a little bit more about this hour. It is great to have all of you with us. Want to just mention just a couple of housekeeping items as we go. A little bit later in the hour, we will turn to your questions if you have any, and so would encourage you, if you have a question for the panel, please use the Q&A function on the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen rather than placing those in the chat. You'll find throughout the hour the chat can move kind of quickly, and questions can get easily lost there. So if we can put them in the Q&A, then that way we'll have a central place to find all of those requests. Invite you to use the chat, though, to respond to panelists, speak to one another all throughout the hour. And so with that, why don't we jump in? And Janie, I want to start with you and by association, Dana. The two of you are working together on a really exciting project in Los Angeles. Your team at the California Policy Lab has built an engine that drives the county's prevention work in terms of homelessness. So tell us a little bit about the project, and maybe you can explain a bit about the sort of the mechanics of this prevention model. How are you using data to identify folks that may be at risk of homelessness before they actually lose their housing?
Dan, thank you so much for inviting me to the panel. It's nice to see everyone this morning. I'm I'm having a really rare experience actually, where I'm seeing a lot of people in the chat from my past life. I've been here in LA for 9 years, but I used to work in Chicago and my family is in Maine. So, anyway, I see a few shout outs in the chat. My family actually lives down the street from Home Inc. It's just like an amazing homeless services provider in northern Maine. So, anyway, I normally am speaking to a more regional California audience. It's nice to see you all today. But to answer your question, my organization, the California Policy Lab at UCLA, has a very specific mission, which is to work in deep partnership with government agencies to try to improve public programs. And so we work in this case with Los Angeles County, they're our government partner, and we build data infrastructure to answer really urgent policy questions and try to solve problems. And we focus on 6 areas, one of which is homelessness. And when we started the California Policy Lab 9 years ago, it was really clear that one of the most urgent questions facing Los Angeles was how to prevent homelessness. We've been really good at housing people here. We're housing record numbers of people through permanent supportive housing, housing subsidies, street outreach programs. But just to put it in perspective, every year, 55% of people enrolled in services in LA are new to the system. So our economic climate here, and I think this is true in other places in the country, it's very pronounced in California. Housing costs, housing supply, income, it's pushing a lot of new people every year into homelessness. And we're never going to solve this crisis unless we can reach the right people. And the key to prevention is understanding not just who needs help, but who would become homeless if they don't get assistance before it happens. It's a really challenging problem, actually, to solve because there are 3 to 4 million individuals on public benefits in LA County in any given year, and about 1% of them will experience homelessness. So it's a rare outcome. You're trying to find the people who are not just housing insecure, who are not just struggling financially, but who are going to be the people who end up in a shelter system or in a street outreach program. So our lab thought that that was a great question for AI or predictive modeling. It's really hard to screen people for that. There are programs who do that well. And it's really hard for a caseworker or a social worker or case manager to understand, looking at all of their clients, who is actually going to end up in 6 months or a year in a shelter or street outreach program. So to answer your question more directly, we built a linked longitudinal de-identified data set. So these are data pulling from the LA County hospital system, public mental health services, the jail, probation, child welfare or the foster care system, prior histories of homelessness, and all of the major benefits programs. So for us, that's SNAP, which is called CalFresh, CalWorks, which is our TANF program, General Relief, which serves unaccompanied adults. And what the model does is analyze all of that information to try to predict who is going to be homeless in 6 to 12 months. And we don't do that as an academic exercise to publish a paper. We were designing this model in partnership with Dana and her team because we needed someone to actually use the information to go out and find these individuals. So I'll just give one more description and then I can see what other questions you have, Dan. But basically, the way it works is that we have all of this data hosted at UCLA. It's totally privacy protected, so we don't know who is in these data sets. And we run the model. We generate a risk list that has 10,000 individuals on it that are rank ordered from highest risk to lowest risk of that 10,000. All of these people who are people who have been into the county hospital system or the public mental health system in the last 6 months. So we restrict the pool to those people. And that's because Dana and her team actually has to do the hard work of going out and finding them. So we send that list back to the county. The county is in a doctor-patient relationship with these individuals, so they have the ability to re-identify the data. So they actually know the names, they can find their contact information. They do some pre-screening to make sure these people are not already homeless. If they're already homeless, they're not eligible for prevention, they will get referred to homeless services, which is a different type of intervention. And so they actually have to cold call these individuals. And I'm sure when it's Dana's turn, she'll describe what those conversations are like and how they go and who ends up enrolled in this program. But we send these risk lists periodically. Her unit calls these individuals and enrolls them in a program And it's basically cash assistance for 4 to 6 months with case management and referrals to other services. And the whole idea here is that if we can catch people before they're homeless, and we're relatively certain that these are the people who are in fact on a trajectory to end up on the street or in our shelter system, that it unlocks that public investment in prevention.
And Dana, I want to turn to you in just a minute to because I'm fascinated to get to the sort of practical implications here. Jenny, in terms of, maybe for an audience that isn't really, steeped in this data, what do we know about, these data sets that you're looking at? What would what are the major risk factors that are being identified, that the sort of the profile of someone who is at high risk, that several months from now maybe is going to end up in that category?
Yeah, so if anyone on the call is a data scientist or a quantitative researcher, you know that the kind of data I'm describing is what's called service utilization. So you're looking at someone coming in and out of a hospital for crisis stabilization services, or maybe they're coming in and out of the jail. And what the model is doing is identifying people at risk. It's actually not that great at explaining why they are at risk, because we don't actually have key pieces of information that are risk, like we know are risk factors. Just to give you a really easy to understand example, we have no information in this data set that I described about income loss, household debt, whether these people are working or not, right? You would imagine that that would be a key risk factor if you were trying to screen people and ask questions. So what the model is doing is using the information available to it to more accurately find the right group of people. And so that's always something that we try to, if you're interested in predictive modeling, it's actually not a great method for understanding risk factors. It's a great method for finding the right people to help. I will say that on average, the people who end up enrolled in Dana's unit, the vast majority of them have a prior felony conviction. They have contact with public benefits system. Most of them have a record of a serious mental illness and or substance use disorder. Many of them have chronic disabilities. And it's a very vulnerable group. And I think you can understand that all of those things are creating barriers to housing and or destabilizing their housing. The last thing I'll say about that that's really unique about the predictive model is that it's finding people who are disconnected from homelessness prevention services. When we first started doing this work and we generated the risk list, we compared the people it was finding to all the people over 5 years that ever tried to get help through the homelessness prevention system in LA. And only 49 out of many thousands of people showed up in both places. So the predictive model is finding a group of people who are on average significantly more vulnerable in terms of their health conditions and also disconnected from these services. So it's really filling a gap. And we don't say that that makes it better. We actually need both. Both of these types of programs are serving people who are at high risk, and it's actually just complementing it by finding people who would otherwise fall through the cracks of the system.
And we know that within AI, there's always this question of the risk of bias. Is that a topic that you've sort of delved into here in this process? And if so, how effective has the model been at kind of equitably predicting these risk factors across racial, ethnic groups? How do you
Yes,
make
yeah.
sure that it's not reinforcing existing disparities?
Yeah, this is top of mind for us. It is a huge priority in our research. And if you are out there thinking about working with academic partners, if they cannot explain to you their approach to this, then find a new partner. It's so critical. But let me tell you, let me give you a couple of things I think that we think about. One is that AI is a tool. It can be used to address inequities. It can be used in ways that advance inequities, right? So you have to really think it's not good or bad on its face. You have to think about how it's being used and how you want to monitor the equity issues. In this particular case, I mentioned that there's a large group of people at risk of homelessness who are getting left out of prevention programs. So I think one way to understand this is that it is in part a solution to that structural equity issue. There are people, because of their serious mental illness and their criminal justice histories and other status issues like immigration status, that are not able to get other programs. So the model is filling that gap. Nonetheless, you need to make sure the way the model is finding those people is equitable. So just because it's solving an equity issue doesn't give you a pass on whether it is solving that problem equitably. The way that we measure equity for a model that is selecting people for a new intervention is that we look at whether it is leaving people out across different groups at the same rate. So you don't want a model selecting people for a new thing or a new benefit that is leaving groups, whether it's gender, race, ethnicity, or other groups, at different rates. So what we're doing is monitoring the false negative rate. That's just a way of saying, like, is it leaving someone out accidentally? We monitor the equity of the model on that measure every time we run it. We run that analysis regularly. So we're confident that when we're sending Dana the list, that it's equitably distributed. If people are interested in this issue, we have a paper about this. So I'm not going to talk more about how we benchmark that. How do we define what's equitable? We're really looking at people experiencing homelessness, not the general population. We want the risk list to look the same as people experiencing homelessness. But that if you work in government or a nonprofit, you know that that is not where equity stops. Then you have all of the other mechanics. How many people are enrolling in the program? How many people are staying in the program? And what are their outcomes in the program? So we look at equity as the evaluation partner to this unit at all four stages, because you need to make sure that everything is pushing all the way through to the end result. And then you're not losing people through any of those stages. But I really appreciate the question. It's so important when we're talking about AI.
Absolutely. And Dana, I want to turn to you now. You and Janie, you and the California Policy Lab are sort of partnered, and you are the flip side of the coin, as Janie mentioned. You are kind of really where the rubber meets the road. And so I'm fascinated to know. I mean, the Policy Lab is able to give you this data, which you're able to then re-identify. But a list of names doesn't knock on doors and doesn't make these phone calls. Tell us a little bit about the experience that your team has in reaching out to these individuals, and how do you approach someone to offer them help for something that they may not yet realize is an imminent problem?
Yeah, thanks so much for having us here today. And I love getting to piggyback on Janie. CPL has been just an incredible partner in this work, and it's only possible because of the tool that they built to help us find our clients. And I always say this, but we use relatively sophisticated technology to find our clients and target our clients, and then everything that happens from that point on is
Right.
extremely scrappy and human. So it's a really interesting balance that we have here in the homelessness prevention unit. As Janie mentioned, once we receive a very bare bones list of clients. It's our job to re-identify those folks. We're going back in administrative data systems, pulling out contact information, addresses, email addresses, phone numbers, service histories, testing a little bit for eligibility there. And then the really, really fun part begins where we're picking up the phone and making 3 call attempts to every client who appears on our list. We're like trying to hit that sweet spot of being really persistent with our clients, but not coming off as a scam or as too aggressive, right? Our clients did not raise their hand to participate in the program, so we have to approach it with a lot of sensitivity. So we're making those phone calls, we're sending letters, we're sending emails, we're working through collateral contacts if a client has one. And I really thought that we would get hung up on a lot more often than we do when we're calling our clients, or at least that we would be asked, how did you get my information? I think over the years, we've really learned to be vague and offer really quick and meaningful assistance to clients in those moments to immediately build rapport and trust. So we just say, we're calling because you have received a service from the county in the last year. It's true for all of our clients,
Mm.
and we don't get a ton of pushback there. We get some clients who say, I don't really need the assistance that your program offers. That's a tough one for us because we do have this level of insight into our clients' risk that they may not share. Um, And there are a ton of phone numbers that just don't work anymore. So the biggest reason that somebody does not move to enroll in our program is because we cannot get in touch with them through all of those methods that I described. But more often than not, these days we are reaching clients who say, "You called me at just the right time. I just got laid off at work, or I just left a hospital stay, or my parent just passed away, and I really relied on them for my housing stability." There's something extremely serendipitous feeling about the moment that we're reaching folks in. And it seems that, clients are overwhelmingly feeling like, wow, I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't sort of called me right in this moment.
That's fascinating. And I love, what I love about this is that it is so different from so many services that, that those of us in this work provide that is sort of available broadly, and it's there, maybe for clients with particular risk factors, but on kind of a first come, first serve basis where, we're kind of relying on clients to come to the service rather than bringing the service to them. Can you share an example? I mean, obviously not an identifiable example, but just sort of a hypothetical around, um, a case where you may have successfully reached someone, and what you were able to connect them with, or what you're routinely able to connect them with.
Yeah, there's a client story that I like to talk about, and this really gets sort of past the point of how we find folks, but more into the intervention that we have designed, which also feels extremely human and flexible and nimble and hopefully very client centered. We met a client whose housing stability was at risk because she was no longer working. And so it was kind of our job once we met her to kind of figure out, what her barrier to getting back into work was. There's tons of prevention programs out there that are really focused on paying rent or addressing arrears or utility payments. There are fewer programs that are able to really provide clients with whatever they ask for, whatever they identify as sort of their barrier and what would help them get past that barrier. This client had a pretty serious mental health diagnosis. She was not leaving her home. She had lost a ton of weight. She didn't have clothes that fit her anymore. So the client's ask to us was to help buy her new clothes so that she felt more comfortable leaving her house. Um, Again, there's a lot of programs that are like, if you don't have a eviction notice in hand and we can't pay your rent, we may not be able to plug in to help you there. But this was an instance where a client said, "Hey, very vulnerably, this is what I need." And it really kind of immediately helped restore some self-esteem, and kind of got her back on the track of looking to reconnect to employment. And once she was able to reconnect to employment, she was able to start paying her rent again. And it just feels like a specific example of something that feels like it might be small, but if more programs were able to sort of meet clients' needs in that way, we just see how small things turn into increasingly larger obstacles for clients. And so to really be able to honor somebody's choice there, it can unlock all kinds of stability in their lives. And you really don't know how these small sort of levers that you help clients pull can help them achieve really significant outcomes. So that's really what we strive for.
That's
Dan, I
amazing.
just I
Oh,
just
yeah,
want
please.
to sorry, I just want to make one observation about the point that Dana made in the technology. So what's really unique about this program is that Dana's group serves the people on the list. There is no question about whether they are or are not an eligible client, and that if you're run public programs, there's huge risk around fraud. With people coming in, landlords may start sending clients into prevention programs, and you have to do a lot of work up front. Is this person really who they say they are? Do they really have this need? It makes public funders do things like, I will only pay directly to a third party. I will only pay directly to a landlord, because they're trying to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars, right? With HPU, there's no risk of fraud because they are calling the people that the model says. So it unlocks all of that flexibility. So I just wanted to make that more explicit. Not that you can't fund programs that are flexible; they just require different sort of auditing places. And in a huge place like LA, it's harder to run programs like
Yeah.
that.
Well, I just love hearing this story because I think in conversation around AI, increasingly there is this fear around things becoming less and less human and more automated. And what a lovely example this is of a way to use this cutting edge technology in a way that is, ultimately really deeply human. So I love hearing about that. Matthew, I want to turn to you at this point. You are working on a sort of a separate but still somewhat related project at Notre Dame, where Janie and Dana are looking sort of at predicting those who may be at risk at homelessness. You are helping to analyze sort of maybe a bigger picture view, a societal view around the discourse around homelessness and how society sees those individuals and families. Share a little bit about the project that you're working on, how it works, and how it's helping to sort of identify and maybe help to shape some public perceptions around homelessness.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. So, as you described, I'm part of a team here at Notre Dame that consists of faculty from our Data Science Institute, our Institute for Social Concerns, um, PhD students, postdocs, looking at forms of bias expressed in media around people experiencing homelessness. So, what we look at and have collected is a corpus of social media data, news data, local government meeting data, where the topic being addressed is homelessness. And then jointly with subject matter experts and community partners, we kind of co-created this um, typology of bias that we see expressed in these sources based on existing research. And then our team manually annotates these for expressing multiple different forms of bias. So these would be things like NIMBYism, things like deservingness, undeservingness heuristics, um, in order to identify whether we can use large language models to replicate this hand coding. Hand coding, for anyone who's done it, is kind of laborious and cost intensive, right? If we can achieve similar performance with large language models, then we can scale up much more rapidly than if we're relying on human annotators. And so once we trained the models, we classify all of our discourse around homelessness and then just look descriptively at what types of bias we see emerging from these different sources, how it varies across location. We have currently discourse from South Bend, where we're located, a pool of comparison cities as well, and we're scaling that up nationally in the next couple of months here. Um, what we find is that generalizations about people experiencing homelessness, negative generalizations, are the most prevalent, especially on social media. Um, this idea that there's some kind of deservingness of people who are trying to receive or need to receive public assistance, and that people experiencing homelessness are somehow responsible, right? And then that absorbs so absolves us of kind of a moral imperative to do something, right? We see a lot of that, particularly on social media, and then we see that actually drives engagement on some of these sites. So Reddit specifically, we find is that these kind of negative connotations experience greater engagement in the form of people interacting with the post than maybe more nuanced positions on kind of the political or social drivers of homelessness, potential solutions. This is probably not too shocking to anybody who's been on social media, right? It's not really the place for nuanced policy discussions, but I think it's useful to understand how it is that people are forming opinions about topics like homelessness based on things that are being perpetuated online in particular, excuse me. Um, and so now that we have these initial results, we think that opens up a lot of potential downstream applications that we're really excited about. One particular that our team is really interested in because we are assessing the impact that this bias has on support for local public policy around housing that would help to alleviate some of the homelessness concern in South Bend is whether we can provide the kind of evidence that these housing policies are effective once we understand how people's biases around homelessness relate to their support for these type of positions. So one of the things that we've heard from partners is that they know, right, that the housing solutions are effective, but they don't think that that is widely understood, right? And if we can use our models to identify exactly what the concerns are, then maybe we can find some way to present the most effective information around the policy that can help people understand how effective it is.
I think you mentioned that the data that you're collecting sort of looks at the perceptions there locally in the South Bend area, but also comparing it maybe to some other communities as well. Are you finding, I'm just curious to know, are you finding differences in the perceptions sort of from community to community, or are there some common threads that seem to be pretty stable across all the different locations that you're looking at?
Yeah, I think what we're finding is it's more of the latter, which might suggest that social media discussions around homelessness are nationally driven as opposed to locally idiosyncratic. But what we find is that there's a decent there's not a ton of variation within our comparison cities currently. In a couple months, we'll have a much clearer picture of how that looks once essentially a pilot right now with South
Mhm.
Bend and some cities that we think are comparable. Um, and so what we're looking to do after this is scale up more broadly. So I think in general, our current preliminary results looks like that they're pretty stable across location.
That's so interesting. And we were talking about how the project that Dana and Janie are working on in Los Angeles sort of combines, the high tech with the deeply human. I know there at Notre Dame that it's not just data scientists that are working on this project, that you're also working in close collaboration, for example, with theologians at the university. How does that interplay work, and what are you finding there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just second the point that I think Janie already made about we're trying to stay focused on the idea that AI in this space is a tool for a particular outcome, right? And so that it's not simply about how can we optimally train a model, right? It's what do we do with the uh, results that can support the folks that are working locally on this problem and get them uh, the data that they need to do some of this important policy implementation work. So the impetus for our project was around public discourse around locating a new low barrier shelter. So and Margie Field, a colleague of ours who is in the Department of Theology and our Institute for Social Concerns, was curious to see how that related to express support or a lack of support or the location of the shelter was related to these forms of bias. And so one of the things that we are working really hard to do is kind of stay focused on um, how the results can speak to public policy, right, beyond just a interesting science problem.
Great. Well, I want to remind you all in just a couple minutes, we're going to turn to some questions from you and the viewing audience. We've already got a couple, I think, that have been added to the Q&A, but if you have questions for the panel, please do put those in, and we will try to get to those here in a little bit. Abra, I want to turn to you at this point. Our other panelists are deeply involved in these projects, specifically linking AI and homelessness. I know that your work is a little bit more broad, maybe a little bit less in the AI space and more in the homeless space. So I want to give you an opportunity, maybe as we get started. Would love to hear a little bit more about the work of the organization that you are leading, Housing Is, and also know that you have been key, and you and I have had a chance to interact a bit as part of an early childhood initiative around homelessness called Thrive from the Start. Do you want to share a little bit about both?
Sure, and thanks so much for having me today. So, as Dan mentioned, I direct Housing Is. We are a nonprofit that was founded about a decade ago on the premise that housing is this critical stability that individuals and families need, but it's not fully sufficient if we really want to improve life outcomes. So, we began our work from executive directors at housing organizations across the country saying, we don't want the kids that we're serving today to grow up and need housing assistance of their own. And so, what can we do so that they achieve enough economic mobility so that they don't need that housing assistance? And we've really worked on better intersecting housing with other areas like education and health, and have really, over the last decade, cemented this concept of cross-sector partnerships as a key method to affect change. And then, as Dan mentioned, in the last couple of years, we are one of the lead organizations that has created Thrive from the start. I'll put the web site in the chat in just a moment, but this is a network of organizations that's working to address infant and toddler homelessness. Um, you may or may not know, but there is almost 500,000 infants and toddlers in this country who are experiencing homelessness. And we think that that is unacceptable. And I did see some of the Thrive from the Start state grantees joining us today. I saw several McKinney-Vento liaisons. Really glad you all were able to join us.
That's great, and I'm particularly interested this 500,000 infants and their mothers falling into this category. I know, at least my understanding is that this is a group that is often kind of hidden from our traditional accounts when it comes to homelessness. So maybe two questions there. Why is that? Is what is it about infants and their mothers that maybe is being missed in these traditional counts, and then maybe to sort of loop us in, to the broader topic around AI. Are there ways that you see technology and the use of this data to make that situation better for mothers and babies?
Yeah, so when we think about this population, it's really not what you might envision. I think, really regarding the comments Matthew was just sharing about perceptions of homelessness, these are not the folks you're going to see visibly on the street, right? So in LA, for example, there's a big focus on that population. We see this a lot with warmer climates because that obviously increases the number of folks who are sleeping outside. For families, what we're more commonly seeing is what we call being doubled up, right? That you're sleeping on a couch, you're sleeping in someone's closet, you're staying in unsafe living situations, you're in a car, right? And a lot of this is because families have a very real concern. It's a founded concern that if they seek help, their children will be taken from them. So we do have some practical solutions. There is a targeted voucher program called FUP, Family Unification Program. One use of that is specifically for families that are interacting with the child welfare system solely because they are experiencing homelessness. Obviously, I don't think any of us think that experiencing homelessness is great for these infants and toddlers, but nor do we want to see mass separation from caregivers. And I think that this really ties into possible tech solutions, both in terms of early intervention, certainly finding these families when they're at risk of experiencing that homelessness, hopefully getting to them before that happens, but also quick and immediate action once they have gotten into that situation. I think it also very much touches on this conversation around stigma. I think this is really fascinating. We obviously know from a broader perspective from our country, kind of how social media has really changed the landscape of how folks are receiving news and changing perceptions and opinions and how that is further shaping policy. This is not new, though, for this population. This is a long-standing group that has had to counter stereotypes around, as several of the other panels have mentioned, who is deserving of assistance. And I think that we see that even for families, right? We maybe don't put that on children, but I think there's really stereotypes around how parents could have possibly let this happen, right? Language like that. I think especially around kind of current policies that we're seeing from this administration in terms of proposed work requirements, for example, for people who receive federal housing assistance. The reality is that folks who are not disabled, seniors, or children themselves, the majority of them are already working, but it's not jobs that pay a living wage to therefore allow you to afford market rate rent or home ownership. So I think if there are ways that technology can help with that narrative change, that would certainly be immensely helpful for seeing policy solutions. I think also really thinking about the work that's happening through these cross-sector partnerships. So, for example, for the early childhood providers who are joining us today, if you don't know what resources are available or you don't have robust partnerships with housing organizations, it's going to be that much more difficult when you discover that a family that you're serving is experiencing homelessness to be able to either prevent that for them or proactively get them assistance.
And Abra, I want to sort of follow up on that question of the cross-sector collaborations, and Janie, this might be something that you want to weigh in on here in a moment too, because I'm wondering what are you experiencing, and one piece of it may be getting these different organizations to share data. Um, but another piece of it may just be other, broader sort of barriers to collaboration. What are you finding, Opera, in the work in this space? Are there major barriers, and how are you helping to break those down across organizations?
Yeah, so I began my career in direct service and I was doing case management for individuals and families who are experiencing homelessness. And when I think about some of the main challenges that if someone came to me and said, we could build any solution to solve this, any tech solution, um, it's that families, as some of you may know, and as Dana, I think, started to really talk about, they are like really hustling every day. And there are so many different places that you're going to. It's one place for food assistance. It's another place so that you can get a new copy of your birth certificate to prove that you are eligible for other services you're applying for. It's another place to get signed up for housing assistance, yet another for childcare assistance. Um, and these folks are incredibly resourceful, but I think sometimes that's why we talk about through Thrive from the Start that the narrative of children being resilient can almost be a damaging one because I think it minimizes how serious this is and how much these families have to go through every single day. It's extremely time consuming. It's costly. Even if you are an organization that perhaps can provide transportation assistance, there's no way that you could hold down a job while trying to get to all these different services. So, and I think lastly, when you're doing that, you're filling out forms at every single place. Um, and it's often the same information. So I think that if there's a way, and we are seeing this, I think a couple promising examples of this across the country, to have that be much more coordinated to reduce that very real physical time challenge and money challenge for families, that could really have an immense value. So, for example, in Pennsylvania, there's something called actionable intelligence for social policy. It's a bit of a mouthful, but essentially there are different systems throughout the state. Now, these are primarily county and government systems. This started out of the University of Pennsylvania, but it's doing exactly that. So if a person goes to one place, they can pull them up in the database and see, you've already gone to these other places, talk to these other folks. I know I did this with permission, of course, from clients on an individual level with different social service agencies that I knew that client would be interacting with to both help minimize what they have to go through, but also really streamline and increase how we can effectively help that person. When it frees up more time for us, that means we can help more people. And I think we've also Housing has done work on an individual level to assist with data sharing, for example, between a public housing authority and a school district, right? They have an immense amount of a joint population. And when they think about how can we address our shared goals together, data sharing is a really powerful tool to do that. We've certainly also pushed for more and better coordination across federal agencies for data sharing as well.
Jenny, I want to let you weigh in there too. Looking at the data, I know from plenty of previous work that even with all of the best intentions from all of the stakeholders involved, getting the ability to sort of share agency data across sectors has its challenges, in terms of permissions and logistics and so on. Has the policy lab encountered any challenges on that front, and how have you overcome that to make sure that you've got the right data in place to help to address this challenge?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, I will say that we founded the California Policy Lab to solve this problem. So
Mhm.
we think we think about it a lot. In this particular case in LA County, there's a history of the county itself creating a data sharing framework, a legal framework for departments to share data with each other. It was created and established by the LA County CIO's office. And so in this particular case, we're piggybacking off of a big effort by LA to try to pull 8 different departments' data together. I just want to say as a side note that you can predict homelessness with much less data. We've built a predictive model for our TANF program that uses basically 2 departments' data, and we've embedded that model in their own IT workflows. So there's lots of ways to do this. It's not the goal should not be to connect 8 different departments' data together. I think if you're in a region where you're trying to get data sharing partnerships together, I've done this work in New York City, in Chicago, in LA, and I will say that one thing I've learned over the years is that it's essential to start with an urgent question that you're asking of the data. It has to be really motivating to your leadership, your political leadership, your agency leadership, and all the lawyers and IT and program people who work for them. And so in LA, trying to prevent homelessness is very urgent. There's a crisis that you see when you're driving around our city and county. When we started this work in New York, it was a different set of questions. We had some terrible storms. And interestingly, the highly motivating question at the time was more around FEMA use cases, sanitation, and emergency response. So, but you can use those questions to unlock agreements that are durable and in place for many years to answer all kinds of things. I think you just need some momentum to get people past the legal analysis it takes to manage the privacy protections for the data. And then there is an IT back end, right? And I feel like I'll just share that I think there's a lot of goodwill in very well resourced technology companies. And often they show up in this space saying, here's a thing I developed, you should use it, when in fact it would be way more impactful for them to say, how do I solve the government's technology issues? Because the data systems we're talking about are often like 20, 30 years old. You can't replace them wholesale. And what you really need are these strategic solutions to extract the data that we're talking about and link it together. And so that's the story. It's probably a whole other webinar. I will just say the California Policy Lab, as a trusted entity within the University of California, does do data linkages at the state and local level ourselves. And we use a lot of different techniques to hash data so that it's privacy protected. If you're working in an environment where there's a lack of trust between 2 big public agencies, it can often be really helpful to have a third party intermediary, especially like a trusted academic partner, a public school higher ed, or a private school higher ed that's really trusted in your community, because they can be like a neutral broker and ensure, sometimes it feels really risky if you're a K-12 school system to share data with a law enforcement agency, even though you really want to know how often your students are being arrested. That bilateral data sharing agreement feels very fraught. That if you can have a neutral broker for something like that, it can be really helpful.
Absolutely. Hey, Dana, I would love to connect your work to some of what Abra was talking about with mothers and children. Obviously, this AI project is one of many things you're doing there through the department. Is there anything you want to weigh in on in terms of young children and mothers in LA County? Anything in particular you're doing with this sort of less easy to capture population?
It's a really timely question for us. I will just say I didn't mention this at the top, but the homelessness prevention unit right now identifies and serves single adults 25 and older, and families also with identified heads of household who are 25 and older. So we've got our single adult population and our family population. On the family side, there are little ones in the household. So we are working with families, and the large majority of our family population, those heads of households are women. Our families tend to be a little bit easier to outreach to, so we're more successful in connecting to our families, which I find interesting. We sense a lower sort of acuity level on our family side than our single adult side. Our families tend to have slightly better outcomes than our single adult. So all of that is interesting to me, and I do think speaks to what Abra shared about how much our families are hustling and needing to stay connected. And it's really just like a different experience in our single adult population. And one thing I'm excited to share is that the HP was currently exploring an expansion to serve TAY, transitional age youth, those 18 to 24. So this is a population that we have actively screened out to date, just due to our expertise and our capacity. But there's some conversation, some exploration, some funding that we believe is going to be coming in the year ahead so that we can expand to serve young folks. So really excited to tailor our intervention to best meet the needs of young people who are very likely system impacted, might have aged out of foster youth resources, or have interacted heavily with youth probation. So that's something that's on the horizon for us that we're really excited to sort of plan around, get a lot of input around, and hopefully expand into in the year ahead.
That's great. Looking at the clock, I want to jump in. We've got a couple of questions in the audience Q&A, and Janie, maybe we can start with you here. This may well have been something you've already sort of addressed, but Oscar was asking how many departments are contributing data, and what did it take at the county level to achieve trust and buy-in to access and integrate all of that data? I know that's a little bit similar to what we were just talking about, but anything else you want to say there?
Yeah, I'll just say that it's about 8 departments, and I think basically the story here is that it took a long time to build the trust, and then I think once people saw that the data was not being misused or didn't create risk, then people wanted to query it. It's a really valuable resource for all hundreds and hundreds of questions that each department might have, that gives them visibility into the people they serve and how they're touching other systems. I did accidentally click on the live answer for the funding question. I apologize. I meant to respond in writing, but I'll just say that our work is almost exclusively funded by philanthropy at the California Policy Lab. And the Conrad and Hilton Foundation and Irvine Foundation in particular funded all of our data science work. And then Dana's unit is funded by originally a combination of American Rescue Plan dollars and now county tax revenue. So just to clarify, I don't think Dana is using any HUD funding. Is that right, Dana?
That's right. We did receive ARPA funding, so we did have some federal funding in the mix, that helped us scale up to the size that we are now, but we are gonna probably moving forward be reliant on more local funding.
I
And
will.
Yeah.
oh, go
Go
ahead,
ahead,
Em.
Dan.
Oh, I was just going to say, I will say in terms of public housing authorities, which of course receive their funding from HUD, they certainly are experimenting with different ways to infuse technology, including AI, into their services. So that, along with I think some of this is not AI related, but the targeted vouchers I was mentioning earlier would be examples of some uses of federal funding sources.
Matthew, do you the question that Jenny was sort of jumping into from the chat was around how is all of this funded? That HUD funding is not very much. How about your work? How are you finding underwriting for it?
Yeah, so our current work is being supported by the university itself
Mhm.
through a strategic initiative aimed at addressing kind of core social issues. So our current work state is being funded in that way, and we're hoping to scale up with additional funding.
Right. Well, we've got just a couple other minutes. One other question, and Matthew, maybe I can start with you, but it's really applicable, I think, to everybody. So, I think everybody can sort of weigh in. But, as we look to better scale these AI tools, what sort of ethical safeguards do we need? If we're using AI to predict risk for homelessness, it's probably not a stretch to think that we could use it to predict risk for other things. How do we proceed down this path without, stigmatizing people that may be flagged by an algorithm?
Yeah, I'll keep my answer fairly brief here because it's not my area of expertise in kind of predictive modeling on people who are or will experience homelessness. But I would just say that I think the stigmatization is kind of second order in the sense that what fundamentally is reflective stigmatization from homelessness itself, right? And I think if we can work towards uh, resolving what it is that results in that stigmatization, it would lessen the fear of stigmatization from being predicted to be at risk.
Janie or Danny, you want to weigh in on that question?
Just going to say that this is something I think about quite a bit. One of the most compelling, I think, rationales for a proactive prevention program like ours to continue to exist is what Janie mentioned at the top, that our clients who have very high levels of risk are very unlikely to otherwise engage in prevention programs that they need. And I think stigma plays a role in that, right? I think our clients have figured out how to move through some traumatic life experiences, how to live under challenging circumstances, and I think part of the reason that our clients don't reach out is because there may be a stigma attached to those programs or being perceived as being at risk of losing your housing, and so it's partially our job to create a very safe, non-judgmental space for clients to really open up about what they need, and be met with no judgment and with a lot of care there.
Janie or Aubrey, any thoughts there?
I think that's really well said. I think that this is not exactly related to stigma, but just the burden that our administrative systems put on families. It's the conversation that neighbor was having around that is so common. It is actually the predominant conversation right now in the homeless services sector in California, where government is even more fractured than in many places. And so there's just layers and layers and layers of registration forms and technology and data systems and referral pathways, and no one can explain it and no one can navigate it. And I think it's like both, if you're already feeling stigmatized and then you are having to navigate that, it's just such a harm that we're adding on top of the other challenges. So that's actually where my head is right now. Can we solve that? Can we have more human-centered design? Is technology a pathway to have more human-centered design? What would it take to build the vision at the ground level and then build the political will to break the funding silos and bureaucratic structures that drive that problem? I just think it'd be really interesting, and maybe help people, overcome their lived experience of these systems being so negative.
Well, we're right near the top of the hour. I want to, Jenny, I think that was a good transition to maybe a quick closing lightning round for each of the four of you. I opened the conversation today by noting that, boy, it just seems like AI, even in the past year, has just exploded into our lives. Not certainly that it was started in the past year, but seems to be accelerating in really remarkable ways. As you look down the road, maybe 5 years into the future, what is a specific hope or a vision maybe that you have for the ways that technology might help to improve this conversation around housing justice going forward? Opera, maybe could we start with you?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think we would really hope, and actually, someone just put in the chat some of what I was going to say, which is, I think, as we've all mentioned, really thinking about the particular sensitivities for this population, just that they've already faced, across many other aspects. So really thinking through how can we do this in a meaningful way. But I think absolutely we've identified today a lot of challenges that technology potentially could help with in terms of both the physical realities for these families day in and day out, and then also kind of this broader idea of how technology is helping to share information and therefore shape policies that folks may or may not vote for.
Matthew, how about you? What do you see? What's your hope for the next 5 years here?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm hoping to get to in this project is an understanding of whether and how we can use AI once we better understand forms of bias and stigma, the extent to which those things are movable in an individual level, right? So the extent to which we can act on those misperceptions, and I don't want to oversell here, right? A ton of academic literature that perceptions are really hard to move, right? It's really hard to change strongly held opinions. But what I'd like to know is whether we can.
Dana.
Just think it's gonna be about balancing the efficiencies that might be created with AI technology, but recognizing that a lot of the work to be done to me still feels incredibly human. Um, and I really believe that an excellent human case manager can really provide a lot of support to a person going through a challenging moment. And I hope that we don't, yeah, I'm not sure. I really hope we can like preserve and take care of our workforce in this moment, who's critical to like act on the information that we can learn from AI.
And Jana, we'll give you the final word.
Well, I think my head in response to that question is in a slightly different place. I feel like we're about to head into an enormous shock to our economy and our labor market. And we're at an inflection point where we will either deepen our inequality and access to economic inclusion, or we will potentially strengthen it, right? And so it has never been more urgent to have a tighter connection between our housing security and homeless services ecosystems and our workforce training ecosystems, and to be thinking critically, particularly around young adults who are in our system. How are we upskilling them? Who is going to participate in the new economy? How are we getting people reskilled? Because if we are not thinking about the actual effects of AI on our global economy, and there are new jobs opening, right? So who's getting access to them and why, and how smart are we being about that? So I'm thinking more about that than I think about the use of AI and service delivery, but they're both really important questions. But that's my pitch for thinking strategically around workforce as we all move forward in our work.
Well, we are out of time. The hour has flown by as it always does. Want to thank our panel today. Aubrey Lyons Warren is Director of Housing is. Dr. Matthew Hounstein is Assistant Research Professor at the Lucy Family Institute for Data and Society at Notre Dame. Jenny Roundtree, Executive Director of the California Policy Lab at UCLA. And Dana Vanderford, who is Associate Director of Homelessness Prevention at the Los Angeles County Department of Homeless Services and Housing. What a treat to have all of you. Thank all four of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to participate in this conversation. Also, want to thank all of you who tuned in today and did the same. We will be back next month. Our topic next month will be around the economics of childcare. We have some fascinating new reporting coming out of Ready Nation that is looking at the real-time economic impact of childcare services in the country, and we'll dig into that report with them. Also speak with representatives from Stanford and Capita. So look forward to having you join us here in a month. Wish all of you a great afternoon, and thanks again for joining us. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.